It's the Flow Morning Show. Our guest this morning talking about energy and security and a whole range of issues associated with that is one of the prominent Liberal senators, Jim Molan, a general or former general in the Australian military. He joins us now. Hi, Jim. How are you?
Wayne, I'm very, very good, thank you. I've had lots of people who have been supporting me in the recent little health issue I had, but I'm very good, mate.
Yeah, I just want to ask you firstly, how are you? Because we have seen you back in the Federal Senate, and that was very good news for many observers. So are you much better?
Yes, I am. In March of this year, I found that I was very, very lucky, Wayne. I found that I had a very severe pain down my leg, which we found was caused by a lesion which was eating away my backbone.
Oh.
And that sent me to the doctor. If my prostate cancer, which they finally found, it took them a month to find it, but God bless them all, they did. If it hadn't have caused the pain down my leg, I may not have gone to the doctor for 1 or 2 more years, and I would have been in serious trouble. And, for your listenership, anyone who is over the age of 50 should really have a very, very simple blood test and act on the results. And, the results are expressed in terms of a PSA. And if your PSA, as advised by your GP, is a bit higher, for God's sake, go and get it looked at. I was lucky, and I've had hormone treatment, I've had radiation, I've had chemo, Wayne, and none of that is nice.
No, it's not.
Stretch the imagination. But thank God we've got a magnificent medical system. And so I'm doing okay, thank you, and thank you for asking.
Okay, Senator Molan, I got some questions for you now relating to fuel security, and I know this is a topic that you are across. Angus Taylor is the Energy Minister, and he said there are 5 weeks' supply of AdBlue in Australia. Do you think that there is a problem with the current urea storage levels that we have in Australia and, of course, the AdBlue storages that we have for our trucking industry?
I think there is a problem, and it's excellent that we've got 5 weeks to solve the problem. The issue that I would focus on is what is the mechanism for us looking at all the things in this country that we don't have much of. And it really comes down, and Angus Taylor is doing a magnificent job in his current job, and I always say whenever I talk about the government, of which I'm very proud to be a member, that no government since the end of the Vietnam War, possibly more, has done as much for national security as the Abbott, Turnbull, Morrison government has done. And we find ourselves in a situation where the world has changed so dramatically, Wayne, and it's changed very, very quickly, so that I'll get to the fuel situation in a second, but because the fuel situation is irrelevant unless you understand the big national security picture. And for 75 years in this country, we have had absolutely no threat because our big friend, the United States, guaranteed both our prosperity and our security. And all we had to do was dash off to a couple of little wars every now and again, and many paid the sacrifice for that, and that's the down payment on our future security. But what has happened, of course, is the rise of China. And China's aggressive, assertive actions should make us think about our security. And the greatest example of that is our fuel security. 90% of our fuel comes from the Gulf. It comes by ship. It either comes directly in the form of product, or it's shipped up to Asia. It's refined in Asia. The crude is turned into product, sent back down to us from Asia.
Yeah, okay. Now, a question on that. We're seeing a lack of diesel refining in Australia. We've, I think, got one left in real terms. Should we have, as a nation, kept supporting those fuel refiners so that we would do more of that crude refining here onshore?
Of course we should, Wayne. That's absolutely correct. We have the policies that we put in place were very, very good for the time, and in fact, the increased storage that we now require of people who manage fuel on our behalf is good. But I'm just not aware that we've got. We can't say to ourselves, well, if our shipping was cut off would we find that we can survive without shipping for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 180 days? What period of time do we actually have self-reliance in? And This is the question we've got to ask ourselves. And to suddenly stumble on the fact that we don't have enough AdBlue the question that I've got is why did we discover this now and not a year ago when we did a full survey of this nation and found out the things that are critical to us and the things that we rely on and we must produce in Australia. We used to produce the additive in Australia, and we could produce it again. And I know that the government is dashing into doing this, and I'm sure we will solve this problem, but then we'll find another 100 problems.
All right, I want to ask you then about the storage of then diesel overseas in the United States, and then the context of this with urea for our farmers and also AdBlue and so forth. Have we missed the mark by not having a safe haven to store, say, more urea product so that Australia wouldn't have this problem?
Yes, I think we have. I think we've got a problem with storage, and that came out because all of a sudden we were still producing fuels and chemicals that had to be stored, but because of COVID we weren't using them at the same rate. So yes, and I know the government has put a couple of $100 million into increased storage, particularly out to the west, and particularly on the Inland Railway, and I know they're investigating that, and I wouldn't be surprised if they started very, very soon. But 2 days ago I was down in Eden in the south coast of New South Wales, and I hope to promote an increased storage of diesel or the equivalent down there for the Navy, for tourist ships that will come in, cruise ships that come into Eden Port. We've got to have this all over the country. I think, and I'm an advocate for looking at every part of this nation, and this should be the government's job. The government shouldn't do it in the end, but they should look at every part of this nation and say, do you have an equivalent of AdBlue, which just happens to be made in China? Now, you might know these figures, Wayne, but my understanding is that 90% of our fertiliser comes from overseas, and it comes from China.
That's correct. And again, it would then seek to ask the question, is there enough push here for manufacturing of that, given that Incitec Pivot have just closed their factory in Brisbane? Should the federal government, Senator Nolan, got behind the Brisbane manufacturing centre there and maybe have kept it going so that we wouldn't have this problem?
I don't know whether the specifics of that, but they should have identified. We, as a government, and I'm as much to blame as anyone, we as a government should have identified all of these years ago. We know that the situation is turning. We know we've got to be self-reliant in the things that we need, not self-sufficient, where every single thing we make in Australia. I'm not interested in that. I'm very much interested in us producing in Australia what we need in Australia. Yet the first step in doing that is to understand of the strategic things, such as AdBlue or urea for fertiliser. What are we dependent on, which is very, very critical for us overseas, and then we can investigate whether the answer is the Incitec factory or not. It's some other way of doing it.
Yep.
We can do all this. We can make things in this country, and defence has shown the way. We're doing fabulously in changing the ability to produce defence items in this country, even to the stage of being able to produce the barrels of weapons, and we will soon produce missiles, but to produce the barrels of weapons, which is extraordinarily high tech.
Yep.
in the way that the steel you need to produce a 30mm cannon barrel for the armoured vehicles that we're producing in Australia from Australian steel. So we're doing it well in certain areas, but we can't just say, if we've got 5 weeks supply of fuel, and I think we've probably got more than that. We've probably got about 30 days in the country of diesel, aviation and petrol, and then probably another 30 days on the sea. If the sea was cut off to us, then we've got 30 days. And we can't just say, oh, well, the Defence Force can use what the civilian community doesn't use. It ain't going to work like that.
All right, let's then look at that security issue of that fuel coming from across the sea. If there is a conflict, China, Taiwan, your view on that and what that could mean for us getting these supplies across the sea?
Well, the first thing that will happen is that no one who owns a ship carrying massive cargoes like fuel or iron ore or coal or whatever, those that own the ships won't be able to get insurance for those ships to visit an area where there's likely to be a war or where there is tension or where there is actually a war. So all of a sudden, it's not the missiles and the bombs that stop the ships, it's the lack of insurance for the ships in the first instance. We've seen that around the world in other conflicts that have occurred around the world. So I think that's the first step. We must assume in our planning that at some stage there would be a high probability of us losing access to sea transport. And that's the basis on which we should be starting our planning. And to do that, we've got to start by knowing what are the strategic things that we don't make in Australia that we would lose in those circumstances. We're astounded, I think, Wayne, when we do that to find out how many AdBlues there are out there.
All right, so there's not just that problem, but the emerging issue, and we're talking about if this happened. Do you believe, from your military experience and the knowledge that you have of what's happening in China, do you believe that there will be a conflict with Taiwan?
Well, I think in the first instance, such a conflict is possible. In the second instance, I think it's much more likely than most people are prepared to admit. And in the third instance, it would appear from everything that I read and write about this that the probability of us winning such a conflict is pretty well zero. And this is the problem that we face. I think we have an idea of war in this country which is shaped by the last 75 years, where someone tells us there's a war in a far distant place in Vietnam, in Korea, in Malaya, in the Middle East, in wherever, and the ADF dashes off and does something over there, and the rest of Australia stays exactly as it is. I think our planning has got to be on the basis that will not be the war. China is not silly. If China goes to war, it won't go to war and give us 6 months' notice. It won't go to war and say, things are hotting up here, rest of the world. Why don't you bring your fleets from Europe and from India, and why don't you spend 6 months getting ready? It's not going to be like that. It will be short and sharp, and if we're going to deter it, we've got to deter it from a position of strength.
Okay, now talking about the ships and things that would need to be made and our deterrent, the barrels you talked about for guns and so on, we've got the situation where the move away from fossil fuels is creating a problem for making steel and making large things like ships. This whole idea of green steel, is that a risk to national security given that we'd be moving away from black steel? Can you see that as being a problem given the current circumstances we're facing? Not only if it precludes us from making large amounts of steel that we need. And I'm all for doing things in a green sense, but in a green sense for the environment, not for some fanatical pro-green people that may have forced things on us out of Glasgow. I'm all for net zero 2050 because in the future our customers will demand that of us, and I'm all for Scott Morrison and Angus Taylor's policies on this because they rely on technology which is what's related to green steel or to hydrogen or anything along these lines. So I don't think at this stage that it is a national security issue. I think that if we needed it and that we were facing a war situation, a conflict situation, we just swing back. All right. Now, New South Wales has, as a government, supported the Shell Harbour and Port Kembla with coal again. They've moved back into that particular approach. Is there another option here, Senator Molan? Should we be considering nuclear energy? Yes, I absolutely believe that we should. And when you look at the technology pathway into the future that our government, and particularly Minister Taylor, has come out with,
you will find that one of the technologies that we are watching, we've got 5 technologies as the first step that we can put money into and that we can do good things with in Australia. You know, things like carbon capture and storage and things like that, where we can actually make an impact. The second level is technologies we should watch, and one of those technologies is small modular reactors. So, as a government, we've said we've got a watching brief on SMRs, and those SMRs are developing well. And, you know, essentially it's exactly the same as you find in a submarine or a nuclear-powered ship, which is brought onto land. And they're almost at the stage where people can start selling them overseas. Once that occurs, then I think it's that they are an extraordinary answer to not just our problems. You know, you can put these things. They're not big. They don't need to sit next to water. You can't make bombs out of them. You can put them somewhere, and you're not relying on a distribution network.
Yeah, the very, very important comment there on nuclear from Senator Jim Nolan. Now, Senator, you mentioned earlier about your health. We're coming up to Christmas. I'm sure you're pretty glad that you've been seeing this Christmas. So have you got a message for everyone across our Flow broadcast areas?
One I have, and it's one that I've put onto my Facebook and my website, and my website is jimmolan.com if people are interested in what I'm doing and what I'm saying. But Christmas, Wayne, I think, whether you're religious or not, it doesn't matter. Christmas is a period of renewal. It's a time of renewal and a time of rebirth. And the kind of renewal, I think Australia is very, like the world, is very, very tired at the moment. And I think that's reflected in the nastiness of our politics at this particular time, and we all need a break from it. And the PM has said to all of us, you know, from Friday onwards, put your feet up, rest, and get ready for a very hard year to come. And I think that all of us should take that advice. Family, renewal, have a good time and relax. And the problems that we face, and there'll be many problems, the problems we face will be a damn sight less than they are now, Wayne.
Yes, good comment. Senator Jim Molan, thanks for joining us here on Flow FM today.
Wayne, thank you very much. Good to talk, and happy Christmas to you and all your listeners.